So I'm going to talk about traditionalism strikes back, and I think the first thing is don't shoot the messenger. It's probably quite good by the door because you might kill me by the end of it. I might have a few problems with glasses because my eyesight's getting far worse with age, so if I do, please bear with me. So traditionalism strikes back, the culture war. And where did this kind of premise kind of come from? So I used to be a strategic planner and do a lot of work in kind of culture. And I was reading lots and lots of youth reports, not by these guys here because they're fantastic, but you get this whole kind of picture being painted that youth are open, they want to smash down the walls, they're kind of caring, etc., etc. And I think in many ways that's kind of true. But it's been raining today, so I'm going to tell you my holiday story, because there's a little bit of sun in it, but it will get depressing in a minute. So I went on holiday. I love Byzantine history, and I like travelling around. And 5 years ago, I went to the Balkans, and then I went across Greece, and I ended up in Thessaloniki. And I was sitting there outside having a beer. And there was a group of 18 to 24-year-olds, and they kind of adopted me. And I felt like really cool, because I felt like hipster for once in my life, which I never really kind of felt like before. And I started talking to them. And they were really highly educated. They were doctors, they were people who wanted to train as a doctor, people who wanted to train as a lawyer. One person was doing a PhD. Then we started talking about gender, and they started saying, well, a man should be a man and a woman should be a woman. Then we started talking about politics, and some people started talking about Golden Dawn and how they kind of supported kind of Golden Dawn. And it kind of made me ponder. The next thing I did a lot of work for Brexit and won awards for Brexit, why the working class voted for Brexit. And one of the things I found there, I was interviewing lots of young people, and it's the same as when I've done stuff on gang crime, is that actually they have more in common with an 80-year-old, their grandfathers, than they do with the kind of Shoreditch, kind of painted kind of millennial that are being kind of painted in the kind of picture. Did more work around kind of extremism and was picking up kind of a similar kind of area. Then did work for kind of Samsung, been working for Blood Normal, for Bodyform kind of globally, and I'm seeing this kind of picture, and I'm seeing a different kind of cohort kind of exists. It's not the majority cohort, certainly not in the West, but I think it's creeping, and in other areas it can be the kind of dominant, which I'll kind of cover. So I'm going to talk about some general trends, because I think we like to focus and zoom straight into kind of youth and what is youth and what are the kind of youth trends. But I think there's some general trends, especially in the West, that have kind of we're being kind of hit by. I think the first one is times are a lot tougher than they've kind of ever been. People are often struggling to get jobs. They may have gone to university, but a passport of education doesn't necessarily kind of mean kind of success. Prices are going up, etc., etc. And for many young people, the future looks bleak as well, because they're unlikely to get on the kind of housing ladder. They're unlikely to kind of save. So you've got all these kind of dimensions kind of going on. And one of the things that I observe a lot, and when I've spoken to a lot of people, is I call it a kind of death of dreams. And a lot of people aren't dreaming again. They're not essentially dreaming for the future, and what does that future kind of mean for them, which is essentially very kind of depressing and kind of sad. And that's really in kind of the Western world. So there's a really interesting study by kind of Ipsos, and they looked at kind of global youth. And I'm going to use the word youth as a terminology here, because I started with Gen Z, but actually the group I'm talking about, they cross over between kind of Gen Z and millennials. I think it's a more kind of mindset. And looking at the Ipsos, it was interesting. They were looking at optimism of kind of youth, and where the highest optimism, there's only one country that would be kind of more kind of developed. I hate that word, but more kind of a Western kind of mindset, and that was Australia. Most of the others were either in dictatorships, or they were in very nationalistic kind of democracies, and you could even say kind of managed kind of democracies. So that in itself, I thought, was an interesting kind of area. And I think you're seeing dreams replaced by fantasy. So you're seeing this kind of big rise of kind of superhero culture, something that's unreachable that you can't achieve. Building on that, the other thing is what you're seeing is a real kind of trust and a lack of kind of trust. And I call it the kind of trust void. And everything that we once kind of trusted, a lot of people aren't trusting anymore. So that includes kind of politicians, the media, in some countries kind of religious kinds of institutions. And the other thing is kind of well kind of documented what you're seeing in the kind of world is a polarisation. And you see this kind of global citizens on one side, people who kind of want to be very kind of open to the world. They're pro-immigration, pro-diversity, think political correctness is kind of necessary. And then you see the other side. And on that other side, they can be sometimes anti kind of immigration, they can be hyper kind of local, and a very different kind of mindset. And when you look at how they see diversity, they cherry pick diversity. So they like diversity if it's close to them. So if they have an uncle who's gay, they're kind of they say, right, we'll fight for gay rights. So they cherry pick what they do. If they've got someone in their family who's disabled, they feel more warm against kind of disability. And then what you've kind of got, and the economists kind of define this, it's kind of open door, closed door, or drawbridge up, drawbridge world. And I think this is the polarity of the kind of world. So open door is essentially kind of liberalism and open door. Closed door is authoritarian kind of government and closing the door to kind of immigration. So let's just quickly, I'm not going to talk too much about youth trends because they're kind of well kind of known, but youth are on a voyage of kind of discovery. They constantly kind of discover who they are as kind of people. And one of the things that I talk about is kind of Icarus effect. And Icarus is, if you don't know, is from mythology, and it's the idea of someone who thought he was a god, so he flew to the sun and burnt and fell down to earth. And what you see in kind of social media is suddenly everyone thinks they're kind of a god because they've got an amazing kind of photo, amazing kind of Instagram. Then they see their friends that have a better one, so they're oscillating, crashing down. And by going upwards and downwards, you're going on a voyage of self-discovery. Then you see a kind of cultural shift, and I think the cultural shift's interesting. Film and TV, people like Daredevil, never seen superheroes get beaten up as much as he does, but showing much more kind of vulnerability. Even in celebrity culture, people are showing much more of a kind of vulnerable kind of side. So what young people are picking up is that the world is kind of multifaceted. You have to have multi kind of faces, and you need to express who you are and your authenticity. So many are embracing liberalism. Gen Z is more diverse than any different kind of generation, and 75% of Gen Z support same marriage. So that's kind of the good news. So what about kind of traditionalism kind of strikes back? Where am I kind of seeing that? First one I've kind of picked up on already, and that is with the white working class. So it tends to be very kind of black and white. Most of these were voted for Brexit. I think it was something like 30% of young people voted for Brexit. Very community-led. They feel that community is collapsing around them. They're unhappy with their life. They saw Brexit as a kind of protest, and the first time they could do an up yours to the establishment. Really dislike political correctness, tend to pick up on Daily Mail kind of headlines or some kind of headlines, dislike this establishment. And authenticity, and it's interesting, we talked about this earlier, authenticity is one of those words, big word, what does it actually mean? But for this cohort, authenticity means to be kind of straight talking, and it means to be kind of strong. And that's why Farage really kind of picks up for this kind of audience. Feminism for this audience doesn't work, because if you've got a woman in a kind of power suit, for instance, or a successful woman, if you're working in a chicken factory in Leeds, that doesn't have any kind of relevance. And you're seeing similar things playing out in the kind of North America. So if you look at kind of some statistics on young people, only 1 in 3 American youth believe it's essential to live in democracy. This is the home of kind of democracy. 81% of you think military takeover would be justified if the government was failing. And again, mirroring the kind of UK, what you see is that the young white working class have very negative attitudes, especially in terms of diversity and especially in terms of kind of Islam, and generally a favourable view of kind of Trump. What's interesting though is when you look at kind of Canada, because Canada's a bit like the Scottish Nationalist Party. The Scottish Nationalist Party always does the opposite of whatever Westminster does. And what Canada always does the opposite of what America does. And Canada's really been the kind of bastion of kind of liberalism. But there's been an interesting ethnography study in South Ottawa, and what they found there was only 44% of millennials actually have jobs. Those that don't have jobs, they don't have pensions, they don't have health care. Blue collar jobs are kind of declining, and they're shifting more and more into kind of populism and the populist kind of rhetoric. And I think populism is an interesting kind of area. After the Second World War, Winston Churchill talked about the Iron Curtain, and the Iron Curtain that's fallen. And what I think we've got is, I think we've got a populist curtain. Because when you really kind of think about it, Italy's kind of populist, Russia's populist, Ukraine's populist, Hungary's populist, Poland's populist. So you're seeing this curtain coming across kind of Europe. And actually what you're seeing actually in more the western part of Europe is you're seeing about a third of youth starting to actually kind of support kind of populism. So so Le Pen in the presidential elections, she got 34% of 18 and 24-year-old vote, which is interesting because she only got 20% of 65-year-olds. She actually got the highest performing youth vote in 2015. They're doing tours which opposes the legalisation of gay marriage. In Austria, the Freedom Party, which is a far-right party, got 42% of the vote of kind of youth under 30. Italy, you're seeing young people really kind of supporting kind of populist kind of coalition. And actually, the Liga actually would never really been a powerhouse if it wasn't for the youth kind of vote. Picking up on that, and I totally agree, there's much more positive attitudes towards LGBTQ+, but this kind of shocks me. So the word faggot is used over 40 million times on Twitter over a 7-year period. It's used 45,000 times a day on Twitter. And this is just Twitter. 10,000 times no homos used on Twitter. Dyke used 4,000 times. And actually, if you look at the Stonewall reports, it's a little bit old. I think it's 2012, so it'd be interesting to see. But actually, you can see really kind of high kind of discrimination that 99% of young people hear phrases like, you're so gay, that's so gay. 1 in 3 gay pupils who experience kind of bullying change their plans for their kind of future and education. Another thing I think really kind of builds kind of misogyny is porn and the kind of porn kind of generation. And 53% of boys who see kind of pornography thought it was realistic. This is kind of in the UK. Boys were more likely to copy activity they've seen, 44%. And actually that's leading to problems such as erectile dysfunction in Canadian adolescents. It's interesting where I've been going kind of the world, kind of talking to people about kind of sex. There's certain countries, especially places like the Middle East, where there's no sex education. So the boys are learning from porn. That's the only place they're learning from porn, because it's not covered in magazines. So they're learning imagery from kind of porn. And building on that, the other thing you're kind of seeing is you're seeing feminism come under attack. And it's interesting, in the United States, 44% of people define themselves as feminists, UK 27%, and Germany 8%. And picking on Germany, there's the Alternative for Germany, Alternative for Deutschland. They did a big Facebook campaign and it got quite a lot of kind of hits. And these are some kind of quotes. So what they did is they held up banners saying, I'm not a feminist. So I'm not a feminist because I like having doors held open for me. I'm not a feminist because as a woman I also want to be weak sometimes and need a strong man by my side. This is from women. From a couple, we're not feminists because we don't need to be made the same in order to be equal. From the man, I like women who reject feminism because I find real femininity really kind of beautiful. So you're kind of seeing this, and the Alternative for Germany really playing into that, and they talk about housewives' rights. So using the language of rights to kind of push this kind of agenda. What some of the other groups and the populist groups do in other things is they talk about how they protect women and how they're the real feminists. And they're the real feminists because they're protecting women, and what they're protecting them from is from immigration and from crime. Trump did the same thing when he talked about Mexican kind of racism. And then in some countries, conservatism is kind of the dominant kind of code. I mean, I think Russia's probably the prime kind of example of that. It's more cosmopolitan than ever kind of before, but males really see themselves as real males. Done loads of research in Russia, and they see themselves as being a real man. They think there should be a division between the sexes. Women won't show vulnerability generally in Russia, and this is one of the interesting things I found in kind of research. They think they want to be perfect, so they show I'm the perfect housewife, perfect mother, perfect friend, etc. So instead of showing vulnerability, they try and show it through kind of femininity and how kind of feminine I am. One interesting stat, though, was on LGBT. It's kind of quite kind of split. If you ask them youth movements in Russia, the biggest one is one run by the government, which is all about where young people go and take photos of people take traffic violations. and some hip-hop stars also supporting Putin. And Putin, the Putin government started closing down kind of hip-hop, but now it's kind of embracing hip-hop. And one of the biggest stars did a song of Why I Love kind of Putin in 2015. This is a worrying chart, because I know I've got Felicia here, who's probably the country's leading expert on Chinese insight. But one of the things I've seen is this thing called Little Pink, which I think is an attack on this group. But these are essentially kind of trolls in kind of China, who verbally attack kind of film director who used a Taiwan actress. They attacked Lady Gaga because of her connections with Tibet. So why is there this kind of turn back? I think it meets needs, actually. I think one of the first things is when the present is really, really difficult for people, what it does is it projects hope. And it projects hope, and it says, actually, don't worry, that the future is just what you knew in the past. So it connects kind of security and hope together. Make America Great Again is a great example of that. Taps into core emotions, they play into emotional spaces. Pride, take pride in yourself, and also take pride in your country, for instance. High levels of joy. They use a lot of kind of memes, a lot of comedy in what they do. It's this sense of someone's caring about me, and I think ultimately it's about fear. And they understand youth kind of fears and concerns. What do you think is the number one concern of youth globally?
Money.
Pardon?
Money.
It could be money. On the one I've seen, it says the three biggest ones is security, education, unemployment. Which surprised me, because I thought the environment was kind of a lot kind of lower. And they tap into that. So Putin's youth organisation says, come and join us and we make sure you get a good internship and good jobs. It's echoed by some family members, and I think this is strange for us in the UK to understand this, but there's very tight kind of cultural kind of networks in a lot of kind of countries. America's really built on a kind of culture of the family, same as, and Russia's kind of playing more and more into that space. So people will often echo and copy what their family are doing. Creates a sense of belonging, a sense of control, seen as kind of fairness, and a lot of these people feel that they've been unfairly treated. So it's really kind of important. They feel that by doing this, it'll become more fair. But I think one of the biggest ones is it's one-dimensional. And with young people told that the world is open, you can be a multitude of different kind of things. That's kind of scary. It kind of reminds me of the kind of briefs you get as a strategist when it said, okay, go and find out about women. And it's like, where do you kind of start? And I think people need a roadmap. But the thing about populism and the thing about the far right, the thing about kind of conservatism is it's very, very one-dimensional. You know what it stands for. It's very, very tight. And I think the other thing, it creates a kind of sense of trust. But I think, lastly, there are two other charts. They're strategically clever. So they're anti-establishment. So watched a far-right video, which was one, and I showed it to Semitician, and they were absolutely shocked because every meme in there was an anti-establishment kind of meme. It's far right. They even had Black Lives Matter in their video montage. It's really, really strange, but everything was used from the left and the right, and they were mixing things together. They play into the counterculture, or the narrative they're using all the time is we are the counterculture. So they'd say things like, it's free speech is kind of being kind of banned around the world. We're a bit like the kind of Sex Pistols and the punks. They showcase conspiracy theories, they play into that, they gaslight mainstream media and say it's irrelevant and kind of lying. They have a sense of irony and kind of fantasy. And sometimes you just don't know what's true with them. It's a bit like the punk movement when they used the Nazi SWAT sticker. Is that irony or is that not true? And Trump does this very, very well. He plays in these kind of two kind of games. They play into the narrative of free speech. I think that's the biggest one and the biggest place they're kind of talking about. They're talking about people being shut down on the campuses. You can't talk about Shakespeare, etc., kind of etc. They talk about liberal totalitarianism, how liberalism's closing down thinking. They use the language of the oppressed and diversity. They reach out to subculture. So Putin did this with the kind of bikers. Trump did this with the kind of bikers, but he also had those people, anti-feminists, who played jokes on others. He had teenage gamers. He used a lot of little subcultures and built them up. They reach out to youth. Le Pen's doing this in France. You've got lots of little activities going on. They've got a group that goes into the States that talks to people and those in the margins. But at the same time, also they've got groups that go into kind of university. It feels real, relevant, and authentic, and I put that in kind of single kind of exclamation kind of marks. But they talk about kind of realness, and we're the real kind of people, and we're not experts, we're not establishment, we're not the elite. And that was one of the problems with the Remain campaign. They were rolling out experts. It doesn't work anymore. It did before with Obama. Do you remember when Obama did the Hope campaign and Oprah Winfrey was kind of crying and Beyonce was kind of singing? Hillary Clinton did the same thing. It fell flat on its kind of face. They used single-minded propositions, so like take back control. They always kind of create a kind of enemy. They create a feeling of kind of strength, and they understand long-term trends. And it's interesting, some of them are joining with religion and some aren't, depending on what's happening within a country. But religion's set to grow, and God's back. And that's quite shocking for the kind of UK. If you look by 2050, Islam's going to grow by 70%, Christianity's going to grow by 34%. A lot of that Christianity is quite fundamentalist Christianity. They welcome attack. So it's interesting. Trump arrives in this country and attacks the mayor, but he knew he was going to get attacked. But they like being attacked. One of the best strategy things to read on this is something by Dominic Cummings about the Brexit kind of campaign. And he said the 350 million is a lie. We knew it was a lie, but we knew it would get attacked. And when it gets attacked, it gets magnified. And we know a lot of people don't believe the press and the media, so they believe what we're saying as well. They reach out to the unexpected. Le Pen's trying to pick up a lot of kind of gay votes, and actually they've got more gay people in higher positions, openly gay people in higher positions than any other party in kind of France. And they understand media, so even when there being no platforming, they're just going on to TikTok. And essentially, I think what they're going to do is they'll probably set up their own kind of Twitter kind of service. So what do you kind of do about it? I think what it's not education. I think that's a real default kind of position. You can educate people, but you can also educate a very clever racist. And actually, if you look at the history of totalitarianism, if you look at the Russian Revolution, those people were really, really kind of educated. You look at Nazism and how that a lot of that support come from the educated kind of class. I think the other thing we do is we simplify very much. And simplification, I think, is we will turn around. We'll turn around and we'll look at the women and we'll say, oh, those women are having Stockholm kind of syndrome. And actually, those women are saying the same thing about people in the West. Because what they say is people are slaves of capitalism. And just dismissing. So I think you need to understand. So what can you do? I think the main thing is you need to play in the same space and you need to provide kind of hope. And that's one of the most annoying things about the Remain campaign, is because the Remain campaign is like saying, let's stay in, but it's not giving hope to these people about how things will be kind of different. And I think the other thing is you need to use similar approaches that they're using to kind of stem the kind of tide. Sorry to depress you, I'm happy I'm still alive. So anyway, that's my kind of thesis.